So I think we'll get started for today's seminar, and a very, very warm welcome to everybody that's joining us for this session. This is our third in the series, in our series of Equality in Research Matters. So based on the feedback from previous seminars, we're today going to focus on what is required to embed equality impact assessments within your organisations. We've heard from previous researchers and people who've attended our seminars in the past. Equality impact assessments are fantastic. People want to do them, but they feel that there isn't a system in place within their organisation in order to make these things happen and to really have the true impact within their research. So we're responding to the feedback that we're getting, and hence we've put on this seminar today. As I say, we have 217 people registered for the session today, and I'm sure people will come online. But another driver for the interest in these seminars and equality impact assessments is that funders, research funders, are now asking for equality impact assessments as a mandatory part of their application process. So I think we're going to see more and more demand for seminars such as this, and also for the use of our equality impact assessment toolbox, which we'll be sharing with you throughout. And I hope some people have already downloaded those. Can we have the next slide, please, Michelle? So I'd just like to introduce our equality, our EDI committee, and the panel that will be answering questions in our Q&A session later. So first of all, I should introduce myself. I'm Marion Walker. I'm the chair of the EDI committee at ARC East Midlands. So we have Barbara, who's on our panel today, who's our community engagement officer. We have Jules, who is our equality, diversity and inclusion consultant. Sandra, who's our PPIE representative. Donna, who is our ARC East Midlands Assistant Director. And we have Christine Smith, who's the PPI co-lead for NIHR, ARC Yorkshire and Humber. And today we're going to have Jules present his slides to us and discuss this area with us. And then we will have a presentation by Christine on her experiences of introducing this into Yorkshire and Humber. So can we have the next slide, please, Michelle? So as I said, this is our third in our series, in our EDI seminar. And please feel free to tweet. This is our hashtag for today's event, hashtag EDI Seminar 3. We've also provided you with a QR code for access to the Equality Impact Assessment Toolkit. But for those that don't have that, we will be putting links into the chat throughout. Throughout the presentation, we're encouraging you to submit questions for the panel discussion section at the end, which can be posted on the Q&A function, which is right at the bottom of the screen. And I'll be trying to keep an eye on that and make sure that we're answering the questions that you're interested in. But please do make use of that function. And also, please use the chat function for any networking as we go along. So can we have the next slide, please, Michelle? So for today, as I say, Jules is going to make a presentation to you on making equality impact assessments in research a reality. We'll then follow that with a presentation from Christine, who's going to tell us about her experiences of implementing this in Yorkshire and Humber. We're going to have the question and answer session, and I'll do my very best to facilitate that. and we aim to finish the seminar by 1:30 today. 2:30, I beg your pardon. 2:30, so an hour and a half. Next slide, please. So you should have hopefully had some pre-seminar information, and we hope that you took the opportunity to watch and listen to our previous seminar on equality impact assessments that talks about why they're important, although we will quickly recap on that today. And we've also put links into previous equality impact assessment presentations. And also we've signposted, as I've said, to our quality impact assessment toolkit, which is also now hosted on the NIHR website as well. So without further ado, I think we'll move to Jules, who's going to take it away for our first presentation. So over to you, Jules, and thanks for everybody for joining today.
Thanks very much, Marion. It's a real pleasure to be able to be with you and to put some slides together and talk a little bit about this topic. Before I say that, I should say that seasonal greetings. It's very happy Hanukkah to everybody, whether you're Jewish or not, it doesn't matter. So a happy Hanukkah to you all. So as Marion's briefly said, our seminar today will recap on the importance of equality impact assessments, but we'll mainly focus on the content and the how-to within the toolkit that ARC East Midlands has developed, which we hope will give you the skills, the tools, and the desire as well to conduct your own equality impact assessments without having to reinvent the wheel, and that's a key factor. So we will reinforce the need for each organisation to own this process, but stress that our centre, the Centre for Ethnic Health Research, has a variety of things that we can use as a support mechanism, including monthly drop-in sessions and a support request system to provide guidance and support, though that does come at a cost, and you might want to pick that up later as to what that might be. Christine's slides and our facilitated discussion will then focus on how you can get this up and running in your own institution. So next slide, please, Michelle. So it's important, I think, to reiterate some of the fundamental things we mentioned in our last seminar. So to begin with, the key question, I guess, what is an equality impact assessment? Well, in essence, it's similar to a risk assessment, but it's one that's focused entirely on equality. So as you can see, it's a process that involves analysis, but also practical implementation to ensure that different people's needs will be and are being met throughout the research process. It ensures that consideration is given to issues of fairness, but also of acting flexibly and differentially to ensure equal opportunity. It pays attention, to the legal obligations outlined in the Equality Act 2010. So it's rooted within the legal system and within the legal requirements that go with it. And an EqIA is therefore an essential part, we would suggest, of the process of planning your work. It prompts you to think more widely and more deeply. And this is a key one. It's not simply the completion of a form. It is a live process that lasts the entire length of the research study. So it's not just a companion to your research study, it's an essential integral component of it. And an EqIA needs to be undertaken by someone with a good understanding of the research area. Next slide, please, Michelle. Well, why do one? That's the key question as well. This diagram highlights the main reasons, I think, why doing an equality impact assessment is a positive and necessary process. to help you make your research or projects be more inclusive and therefore more effective and relevant to people on the ground. In essence, we can make, and we did so in the last seminar, the following cases for doing EqIAs. There's a moral and ethical case. As I said before, it's all about fairness. There's a legal case, I mentioned as well in the last slide, the legal obligations of the Equality Act. There's an organizational case. It makes your organization more credible, more community focused. Therefore, there is a community case. It's all to do with trust, to do with accountability to the people who we serve and to the people to whom we do or for whom we do research and with whom we do research. There's a mandatory case, and that might be something that is followed up later. As Marion says, this may well become a mandatory requirement in future for all health research to do equality impact assessments. And of course, the research case itself. By making research more inclusive, we're making it more effective as well. Next slide, please. Completing an EqIA form, therefore, may be mandatory requirement or become one in the future. That's a key thing. Ensuring fairness, of course, is the right thing to do. And a thorough EqIA should therefore ensure that the legal duties under the Equality Act and those enshrined under the Public Sector Equality Duty are both understood and are met. EqIAs help an organisation not only to meet its legal duties, but to become, as I said before, more accountable, more inclusive, more credible, and more community orientated. Effective EqIAs ensure that community needs are thought of from the very outset and are met throughout the process. And there are, of course, tangible benefits to researchers in funding, in recruiting, and in publishing. A thorough EqIA is therefore more likely to ensure that your research makes a real difference on the ground. All of these reasons, as I mentioned previously, were addressed in our previous seminar. Next slide, please, Michelle. So, ARC East Midlands has successfully adopted and developed an EqIA system and process. From our experience and in our role as national lead, we want to help you to consider doing the same. And it's important to note that this process that we've adopted here is supported by the ARC Director, by the ARC Exec, and the ARC Scientific Committee. Truth be told, some have taken a little longer than others to be convinced of the benefits, but we've got there in the end. And I think there's overwhelming support within our ARC East Midlands for that now to happen. And so I guess a key thing here is top-down support. Top-down support really is essential if you're going to make your system work. Next slide, please. The very first thing we did was to bring together a small team to look at what to do, how to do, when to do, who to do it with, etc., etc. And that small team included the following: someone with equality, diversity, and inclusion experience. That's a key factor and an important factor as you go through thinking about your own system. But we also need a researcher, someone who understands the research process and all the requirements that go with that, some of the administrative requirements, yes, some of the bureaucratic requirements, but also the methodologies and the practices that go with making research an effective process. We need someone that offers a patient and public involvement and engagement perspective. We're very, very lucky in ARC East Midlands to have Sandra Padgett in that, who's obviously part of the panel today. And of course, all this can't be done without administrative support. You do need people in the background to be able to do things and to get things going and making a system operational. Next slide, please. The second thing we did was to develop some resources, and this took obviously some time. We were starting very much from scratch. Even though I've been involved with equality impact assessments in the public sector from my previous work in local government for a long, long time, what we were developing were resources that were specific to the health research process and the agenda. So it had to be tailored to that requirement. And as a consequence, we developed effectively two systems. Firstly, an equality impact assessment for systematic reviews. And that was specially designed and consists of two parts. There's a section A to be completed prior to commencing a review, and a section B, which follows its completion. And these documents, as you'll find if you already looked at the toolkit, are available on the toolkit. And second, the far more broader resource was an equality impact assessment for all studies. And this package meant a whole range of things, really, including some comprehensive training and support systems, some templated forms, a directory as useful resources, as well as ongoing advice and guidance. Next slide, please. It might be good actually just to have a little think about what our EqIA toolkit actually consists of. Those of you that have downloaded it and have used it already will know this, but essentially it's this. And the results of all that process that we did before in terms of designing and so forth are all contained in that toolkit. So yes, there's an EqIA form. Well, there's two forms, as I said before, one for systematic reviews and one for wide and broader projects. There's an action plan that is part of the form and monitoring procedures. There's some guidance notes to help you complete the form. And those notes are in considerable detail and get updated fairly regularly. There's an example of a completed template, I think one that's based around mental health, if my memory serves me right. There's a feedback document, and then there's two quite weighty documents. There's a directory of information, which I had a look this morning. It currently comprises over 1,100 entries, and these are of useful organisations, useful sources of information, useful government documents, useful research process documents, useful equality-related documents. There's a whole range of stuff in there. And secondly, the health inequalities document, again, I had a look this morning, and that now there's now 82 pages of worth of information there. And that contains the sort of information that you will need to have to populate your equality impact assessment. It looks at health inequalities across the protected characteristics and further. So there's a lot of information contained in there, as those of you that have already had a look will hopefully testify. Next slide, please. We then had to make a number of decisions on how to implement, and we considered basically all these questions. Firstly, when should an EqIA be undertaken? As part of the funding application process or after funding has been approved, for example? When should feedback on each initial EqIA be given? And what form should that feedback take? What are our update and reporting mechanisms? What should updates actually look like? Where does our prospective EqIA sit in our current research system? Who will be involved in checking and advising on each equality impact assessment? Who effectively is our EqIA panel? And what external support advice do we think is needed? And lastly, an essential one here, what are the funding and staffing implications? Next slide. And step 4 is effectively addresses those questions. Here is quite a succinct link that I know was in the previous seminar that shows effectively how our process actually works, the chronology of it. So initially there are 2 questions within the main ERC-EM funding application form, 2 questions about equality impact that almost sets the theme, if you like, gets us thinking or gets the study team thinking about it. Once the study is funded and has been approved by the scientific committee, the study team contacts are invited to join a workshop or a briefing session arranged by the centre to offer and provide instruction and further clarification. This is when the EqIA package is sent to the study team so that you can have a look at all the information there at your perusal and at your time and consequence and so on. The EqIA form is then completed by the project team, the study team, and is submitted. It's then considered and reviewed by our panel, who provide detailed feedback on the form to the study team contact. And then begins a process literally of toing and froing. Progress reports, sorry, can you just go back one? And again, that's it. Progress reports, formal progress reports are included within, I think, on a 6-monthly basis. But then there's also a more informal process that I've said before, includes things like our monthly drop-in sessions to which anyone is invited and can come to chat about the state of their EqIA, the state of their research from an equality perspective. And of course, our EqIA panel is available for ongoing advice and guidance, both formally and informally. Next slide, please. So before implementing in your organization, you'll need to consider the questions we had to ask ourselves that was covered in one of the previous slides. And just as a reminder, here we are. This is what they were. The timing of the process, the extent of the feedback and the form of that feedback, what reporting mechanisms you might want to put in place, what sort of thing you're looking for as an update, type of information, the amount of information, and so on. How the EqIA sits within your current research system, your checking process, who's going to be your panel, and what's the panel procedures? How does it work? What external support advice you think you will need, and of course, lastly, of course, as I mentioned before, funding and staffing implications. Now, it's important to reiterate that you could, of course, use the model and the documents we have put together. I'll be reiterating that later on as well. Or you could decide to develop and use your own. It's entirely up to you. Next slide, please, Michelle. So we need to run a pilot and tweak your processes to see how they work. And we would suggest either a real research proposal or you devise your own. That process should involve some self-assessment and review of each part of that process. And ask yourself some of these fundamental questions. Does it do what you want it to do and in the detail that you want? What might you need to modify? And what changes then have you decided upon? And lastly, of course, how and when you're going to ask us, or if you want to ask us, any pertinent questions and to get the benefit, hopefully, of our good practice and advice. So the type of support that we can give from ARC East Midlands, as I say, as part of our already experience of running this and as part of our national lead focus. Well, as you already know, the toolkit is available online. It's a public document or a public series of documents for you to use, for you to download, and so on and so forth. And you could either use these in their entirety or you can tweak accordingly as suggested through that sort of pilot process. The other thing we have is some recordings of previous seminars, and the presentations are available on our YouTube channel, for example, so you can review in detail what we've said. I mentioned this previously. We run a monthly interactive seminar on a sort of drop-in basis to provide advice and guidance. And sometimes we can have 3, 4, even 5 people come, all with their own research questions, all with their questions related to equality and diversity. And we get through 3 or 4 sometimes even more projects. Sometimes actually we've only had one person that's come and they get the benefit of our advice for a full 2 hours if they want it. So, and there is no limit to you coming back. So don't think that if you just drop in once, that's it, you can't come back again. In many ways, it's great to see regularly people coming back and telling us what they've done as a consequence of our advice, what they've done as a consequence of their system, and so on. So yeah, these seminars are there and you can book onto them on our webpage. The Centre for Ethnic Health Research also has a support request system, which is available to seek additional advice and support. And sometimes, quite often, of course, this will probably have a cost, and that will be made known to you through that particular system. And lastly, and certainly as importantly, you are free to attend our seminar series on the Equality in Research Matters programme. As I said, this is the third of our seminars. We also had an informal seminar workshop last month on the social model of disability. So you're welcome, more than welcome, to book onto those, and they are free to attend. Next slide, please. So 10 important points before I come to a conclusion. Firstly, the Corporal Jones from Dad's Army, don't panic. It might seem a very daunting process, but actually it's hopefully it's not that, and hopefully we can smooth that out for you. Keep things simple, I think is a really good suggestion as you go through the process. Equality impact assessments are challenging. They have to be. They're dealing with challenging issues. Equality and ensuring fairness, ensuring inclusivity. It is challenging. But it's challenging, but it's also entirely logical. Once you look at it, you will see, yes, this follows in that particular process, one step to another step, and so on and so forth. Take time to think things through. Certainly involve the whole study team. Equality impact assessments work best when there is a whole team approach to it. Less so, potentially, if it's just given to one individual or two individuals to do. The rest of you in that study team then don't get quite so involved, and sometimes there can be a bit of a disconnect from our experience. The fifth point, ensure that you encompass all the protected characteristics of the Equality Act 2010. And there may also be other areas that you need to consider that are not actually identified as protected characteristics. These might include socioeconomic status, immigration status, for example, and geography may well be a factor in terms of equality as an issue as well. And also consider issues relating to intersectionality. Next slide, please. Point 6 is really important. Remember that an EqIA is a process, not just the submission of an initial document. If you treat EqIAs simply as a document to be completed, as an administrative task or a tick box exercise, that's effectively all it will be. So embracing and mainstreaming the process is key if you're going to get the benefits from the whole process, that benefit of inclusivity, that benefit of diversity, that benefit of inclusion. And with that in mind, leadership and a supportive structure for your EqIA process is vital. To reiterate what I've said before, you can use the process and documents that are already in place in East Midlands. You don't need to reinvent the wheel if you don't want to. They're there and ready for use. But if you do want to, you'll use them and review and make adjustments when you need to do so. That's perfectly fine. And lastly, remember that doing an EqIA will make a difference. If it's done properly, if it's done thoroughly, if everybody's involved, it will make a difference. Your research will benefit as well as any tangible outcomes. So this is what we're trying to do. Doing an EqIA hopefully will help to change mindsets and make a real difference. It means inculcating, promoting, developing an EDI mindset by the use of an equality lens, by getting people to think alike on equality issues, in practicing equality impact until it becomes natural, instantaneous, and constant. Leadership, as I've said, is vital. But fundamentally, and this is a question we always come back to in our EqIA panel, in everything that you do, always ask the question, if done in this way, who may be disadvantaged? Who may I exclude by taking a particular action or choice? Next slide, please. And effectively, you're now good to go. Seems entirely logical that you can go through all this within sort of 15 slides and so forth. As I said before, it is challenging, but it's an entirely logical process. And we have done a lot of the work for you in many respects, and are certainly keen to help you as you put things into practice. And on that very theme, let me now hand you over to my good friend and colleague, Christine Smith.
Thanks, Jules. So, hi everyone. So my task is now to talk about how we have collaborated with East Midlands, because I am the PPI lead in, public involvement lead in ARC Yorkshire and Humber, but I also work with the core team in ARC East Midlands. And we had a conversation about, would it be possible to take what's been done in ARC East Midlands, plonk it into Yorkshire and Humber, and would it work in that different context? So that's what I'm going to talk about for the next 5-10 minutes. Can I have the next slide, please, Michelle? Next one. Thank you very much. So, undertaking this pilot is part of the sort of wider EDI context in ARC Yorkshire and Humber. So, last year, I was asked to develop an EDI proposal by our executive team. And at the same time, I was saying to my program manager, Sally, we need to start thinking about EDI. We need to start thinking about systems. And so that was a happy accident. And I developed and submitted a proposal to our exec, which was approved. I'm very happy to share that proposal if it's useful for anybody. And we, as part of that proposal, we developed an EDI special interest group, which involves myself. It's a small team. So there's myself, there's 2 EDI experts from the University of Bradford, there's managers and public contributors as well. So what we've done in the past sort of 6 months is we've done some PPI asset mapping in Yorkshire and Humber, so we now know who our communities are that we're working with. We have, at the moment, we're doing some EDI monitoring of staff. So that's staff within the ARC, so that we can think about how we might need to work differently to make diversity more meaningful. We're doing an audit of the diversity of our participants within our projects. And we have a first draft of our new EDI strategy, which we are just going into consultation about. But what I'm going to talk about is the pilot that we've done, the pilot that we're still doing within this raft of activities. Can I have the next slide, please, Michelle? Okay, so the EIA pilot in Yorkshire and Humber is an implementation project which is about reducing emergency admissions to hospital from care homes. So we decided that we really weren't sure about the process that we were going to need. So we decided to just suck it and see. So I had an initial discussion with Emily, who's the project lead. Emily's an early years researcher. This was her first big project, and she was really keen to give it a go. So we had an initial discussion. We shared the toolkit, and off she went and had a stab. We came back, we discussed it, and we over sort of a 9-month period, we had a series of conversations. And And then in May, June this year, we had a reflective conversation about what worked, what didn't work. So Emily has now left, she's moved on. So I'm waiting now for the new project lead to be in place so that we can follow up and carry this forward. Next slide, please, Michelle. So what's worked well? The toolkit worked well. I'm definitely a fan of the toolkit. The worked examples, Emily really liked the worked examples. Even though her project was an implementation project, she found it incredibly useful to be able to look at some of the case studies that are available on the website, and the guidance. She was really, really happy with it. We also felt that having this flexible process, and granted, as and when this gets implemented more widely, that will have to become more formalized. But what really, really worked was being flexible, and by the process being led by the researcher and the milestones in the project, and not by some sort of arbitrary system put in place by me. And it has made a difference to the project. So, for instance, it's made a difference to, it led to changes to the team's approach within the care homes. So they changed documentation, they changed the way that they're considering staff and EDI, because they hadn't really considered that staff were also participants in this project that they were doing, and they'd not really thought about that. So it really kind of opened their minds about what they were actually doing within the project. And it really opened Emily's head. She was waxing lyrical about how great it was. And this is a quote from our reflective conversation. So she said, "We're getting a little bit better at, say the demographics that you hear about more often, but this project has really made us think about the demographics that I've never even thought about. Like, I don't think I've ever thought about how my research would impact on the LGBT community ever once. But it's been really interesting and I've enjoyed it." So it's brilliant, absolutely brilliant that that impact on a researcher just made me really, really happy. So what's happening at the moment is that the patient safety team that this project is part of, they're now considering the evidence for EDI in their field. So as I say, I'm meeting with the new project lead in January. We're going to follow up and see what happens next. Next slide, Michelle, please. What we need to think a bit more about, and this very much speaks to what Jules was saying. So the process can be very paralyzing for early career staff, I'd suggest. And also, the first time you do it, it's quite easy to get overwhelmed. But as Jules said, this isn't something that you should do in isolation. This is absolutely a team effort. So we started to have conversations around, could managers be involved? Could PhD supervisors be involved in these conversations? And if we're going to do that, what support infrastructure do we need in Yorkshire and Humber? So we've seen what East Midlands have got. So we need to now start thinking about, okay, if we're going to do this, how are we actually going to implement it? And getting back to the implementation aspect, Emily felt that the supporting information in the toolkit was very much aimed at public health interventions, and there isn't much data about patient safety, so she did struggle to see what was relevant. So Jules talked about when is the best time to do it, and I came into this thinking, you know what, you need to do this right at the beginning. Before you do anything else, you need to start thinking about this. But through working through this with Emily, yes, you need to start thinking about this as early as you can. However, it's an iterative process, and you definitely need your initial research question, we think, before you can have a proper think about this. That's not to say that this is a one and done process, because it isn't. It's a rolling process. And the final thing, absolutely, if we put this process into place and that is the plan in the new strategy, then we definitely need a strong support infrastructure, and we need leadership from our leadership team, senior leadership team. Next slide, please, Michelle. So I just wanted to finish really with this quote that was another one from Emily, and she said, on reflection, it made me think about ways that research that doesn't initially seem to have an equality element to it, how big of an impact doing an equality impact assessment can actually have. And she said, not only has it made me think about it for this project, it's made me think about previous projects and how they might have happened differently if an equalities impact assessment had been done. So I'm going to leave you with that thought. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christine. I think we'll move to our next section, but first I want to say a huge thank you to Jules for taking us through that process. I think it's been quite a journey for ARC East Midlands, and the team have been honing the process and making sure that the toolkit is fit for purpose, trying to sort out problems as they go along. So I think they're doing a fantastic job, and really we are seeing the whole process making a difference to all the research that's going on through ARC East Midlands. I also think I just want to flag up that as a research organisation in ARC, we are looking at everything that we do, all our terms of reference, everything that we do throughout ARC East Midlands does have an equality impact assessment conducted on it. So I think ARC East Midlands has done a lot of the groundwork for organisations and for people to lift. And as Jill says, please don't reinvent the wheel. Take it and tweak it, use it in its entirety, whatever way you feel that it serves your purpose best. We do like to hear how people are using it, if they're using it differently, because we're still on that process of continuing to learn ourselves. But it's there for use, and I think the chat had been disabled for a little bit during our conversation, so it's now enabled. So please note that all the links will be put in there. And can I just encourage you to start posting some questions for the panel? I'm going to open it up to the panel in a minute. We do have a question already, and I have some for the team that I'd quite like to ask. But also a thank you to Christine for her experiences of trying to implement this in Yorkshire and Humber, and very interested to hear just what's worked well and the impact it's making there. So thank you, Christine, for that. So as I say, the Q&A session is now open. We have a significant amount of time in order to have this. Please use this time to ask the team any questions that you have. It was one bit of feedback from our previous seminars that we didn't leave enough time in order to ask questions and have further discussion. So please, as I say, make use of this time. So I'm going to take one of the questions that's been posted by Dan Kumar, and that was, can I check if this is all linked specifically to research studies? Dan says, I'm not directly involved in running studies, but I'm keen to implement this approach in other areas of the organisation. And I wonder, Jules, do you want to take this question?
Yeah, absolutely. And the answer, Dan, is actually yes and no. The specific stuff that we've been talking about, yes, is geared around research. But what you could do is tweak some of the stuff to whatever requirement that you might like, because some of the questions that we ask are relevant for equality right across the perspective. In one of our recent seminars, we had interactive seminars. We had someone from ARC, Greater Manchester, I think she was from, and she said, "Well, I quite like to do an equality impact assessment on recruitment. Can this work with regard to recruitment?" Well, yes, of course it can. And what we often suggest is to research people is when you're doing your various aspects of the research process, you might want to implement a little EqIA system for each one of those particular elements of process. So, for example, if you're trying to recruit to a panel, an EqIA approach would ask questions about, well, how diverse is your panel? How representative of the health condition is your panel? Are you actually engaging with as many communities as you think you should be doing? Are you covering all the protective characteristics in that? Are there key people that have been missing historically from being on those sorts of research studies? So yes, as has been the case ever since equality impact assessments came in, gosh, blimey, 20 years ago now, Marion, isn't it? Something like that. And were used within the public sector accordingly. Yes, you can tweak it. If you want to ask her how to tweak it, then obviously please come on one of our seminars and we can help you by discussing that face to face if that's of some help. So I hope I've sort of answered that question.
No, I think you've answered it really well, Jules.
Thank you.
Please do post questions. As I say, no question is ever silly. I will ask the one. I'd actually quite like to ask Barbara and Sandra to comment on what challenges did you have in setting up this process? Did you see any specific challenges that as you were setting up the panel and setting up the whole process, what challenges did you come across? Because I think it'd be good to share that.
Sandra, do you want to go first, or?
You're on mute, Sandra.
Sorry about that, everyone. Well, shall I go? Yeah, I'm the public member, and I have a lot of experience reviewing with NIHR and being members of funding panels over the last 20 or so years. But I think one of the things that's come to me over time, I think we've done this project now for about 4 years, is that the PPI members that might get involved in helping to fill out the equality impact analysis at the beginning of a study don't all have to have one of the protected characteristics. And I feel that has been quite a difficult message to get across to people. But what you will, I think, to me, it seems reasonable that what you will have to do with your PPI members sitting on your management groups and your studies and your, focus, your consultation, reference groups, whatever they are, is they will need a bit of training about what the Equality Act is and about those protected characteristics and how they might, people might be excluded from particular designs of research and to be able to join in those discussions. I mean, if you're going to talk about heart disease, yes, you have to have people there who've had lived experience of that to help you design your study, etc., all of that stuff. But those people don't have to be disabled in other ways or anything like that, but they need to know the issues to help you design that study effectively. That's, for me, has been quite a challenging message to get across. I'm still not sure that researchers fully understand that.
Thanks.
You don't have to have 9 people with each characteristic and heart disease on your study. That's even impossible. You won't do it.
That's a really good point, Sandra, because I think one that people grapple with. That's good for you to clarify that. Barbara, do you want to comment?
I think challenges, I would probably not use that phrase challenges. It's more about consideration. We should be mindful of. And I think, you know, all three of us on the panel are very mindful of the workload and the burden on researchers and filling in other forms and, you know, all sorts of bureaucratic dimension. So I think one of the things is, how do we make it relevant? How do we make it meaningful? And how do we provide a supporting guidelines so researchers can see value in impact? So I think it's more about how do we translate that message in the importance of undertaking the quality impact assessment, and how do we create that practice of change within the research mindset and working with individual researchers. We're finding that, you know, is important conversation to have, because, you know, when you open the documents, they feel quite overwhelming. And I think Christine did mention, you know, it was a journey within her team, and, you know, some of the information is more relevant to one area of work than another. But I think it's about making meaningful for you and making something what can have an impact on your research journey and what you're trying to achieve. So I think that's not so much challenge, that's the consideration we always try to put across when we're having that the conversation with research team. Thanks,
Barbara. That's great. A question that came in via email earlier was, how can EDI leads apply suitable and proportionate pressure to key centre decision makers to enable researchers sufficient time to build meaningful relationships with underserved communities without detracting or diluting their important research into tight timelines for delivery? And I offer that out to the panel, anybody who wants to take that one.
I can sort of have a little. This is a massively challenging issue. How to get people in the hierarchy of organisations up for it and to recognise the importance. I think what I would look at is maybe have a look at that slide that we said about the various cases for equality impact assessments. Because in all of those, I think, well, the 6 boxes or whatever it is that were there is an essential component. Some managers, some leaders, for example, need to be or respond better to sort of the legal perspective, you know, that this actually means that you are meeting your legal obligations under the Public Sector Equality Duty of the Equality Act. Sometimes that's a heavy thing that you can put to people, but I think it's about recognising as well some of the big hits with regard to community buy-in, with trust, with research credibility, all those things. And I guess our executive and our people within the East Midlands, I'm pretty sure would be very happy to provide a type of messages of support and recognition of how it's important, how they have found it an essential component to include. So have a look at that slide, as I say, on the various cases. Use whatever weapon you think is the best one to use to get through to people. As I say, the legal obligation certainly works with some. The community focus, get people from the community involved. You know, people that have been part of your research, get them to speak to people in the hierarchy of organizations to say how important equality and diversity is, how it is important to get a representative group of people involved in your research, and so on and so forth. So utilize whatever weapon, I think, and I use the word advisedly, that you think is important, and go with it. But look at all those the different bubbles, I think, for the different cases, I think would be my recommendation.
If I just made, sorry, Marion, if I just chip in, and I think about long-term impact and solution. I think, you know, any type of engagement and relationship, it should be built based on the sustainability. So actually thinking beyond specific research project, because you will be building that relationship for long term, and you will be supporting another teams within your university organization. So if any is not a short-term goals, it's a long-term solution to build this meaningful relationship with these groups. And I think that should be enough to get the buying in terms of your leadership team and EDI.
Thanks, Barbara. Thanks, Jules. A question here, and I'm keen to understand where equality impact assessments are being built in at system level from an NIHR perspective, one of our biggest health funders. And it's so important that this is a consistent approach. And I wonder if Donna wants to pick up that area.
Yeah. So I'm not aware of what's happening at an NIHR level nationally. As far as I'm aware, we've developed this process in our ARC East Midlands, and it's kind of started from us, and we're hoping to roll it out by seminars such as these. And I also noticed another question: do we see this being adopted by other ARCs other than Yorkshire and Humber? So obviously, our plan within our capabilities is to help roll this out. It's obviously not a decision for me whether or not this is rolled out across other ARCs, but I would hope that the ARCs do work really well together. So I'd hope it would be something that will filter across. And certainly, we haven't mentioned today, but we do a lot of training as well around cultural competence and effective community engagement, which we offer 2 free places a year to each ARC, and they're always taken up. So this is something that, yes, myself and Christine would like to work with other ARC programme managers to eventually get this rolled out across the ARC and the rest of the NIHR infrastructure. But I'm not aware of anything that's happening from kind of like a top down, if that answers both of those questions, actually.
It does. Thanks, Donna. That's great. You've anticipated that one well. I have another question here on how do you ensure equality and diversity when using or working with secondary data or data that has already been collected as a researcher? I'm happy for any of the panel to pick that one up.
That's an interesting question. I think, obviously you can use this as a reflective practice and actually undertaking the quality impact assessment on the process, on the activity of run it done, which allows you, to practice your way of thinking and making that inclusion in your practice more reality. So I don't know if you want to add anything else, Jules, but I will see this as a reflective exercise in this particular case.
Absolutely. I think that this does relate, I guess, to our approach to systematic reviews, in the sense that one of the key questions that we look at with and encourage people to look at with systematic reviews is when you are looking, reviewing the evidence and the information that's out there, do so with an equality lens. And an equality lens comes from those questions that are included with an equality impact assessment. So it enables you to scrutinize, for example, whether past research and whether past data has actually done the things that you now have become aware of that are important, which is to do with inclusivity, which is to do with diversity, which is to look at the protected characteristics. Are there voices that are missing? Are there have the questions that have gone in with that secondary data been as penetrating equality-wise as they could have been? Who were involved and from a PPI perspective? What were the focus groups? You can actually cast your eyes back, and that's what we try and encourage with the systematic reviews, that you're trying now to think, right, there's some gaps here. There's some gaps in that particular bit of that particular bit of research, in that approach. So how do we ensure that those gaps are filled in the future? How do we ensure that people start to recognise not just the need to engage with new people, with new voices, with people that are seldom heard, but are also easy to ignore, but also how do you do so? Where do you do so? With whom do you do so? How do you, and so on and so forth. So I think being reflective, equality impact assessment allows you to look back and reflect, but it also allows you to look forward on the basis of that reflection. So that's what I would say there.
Well, thanks, Jules. That's helpful. We have a question here from Tracy who says, has this or will this work be highlighted to industry, as they're often further behind with things like PPI, research inclusion, as it was mentioned earlier? The quality impact assessment needs to be considered started at an early stage. Anyone in the panel want to pick that one up?
I'll take that one, Marion. So I think as far as we're concerned, so our remit has never been to roll out quality impact assessments across the country. We've kind of taken that upon ourselves because we want for everybody else to benefit from what we've learned ourselves. So we highlight these seminars and we highlight the toolkit in as much as we're able, but we're not, I wouldn't say we're specifically targeting industry, although I think, and Michelle may correct me if I'm wrong, although at a later date, we do get some industry partners attending our training that I've mentioned earlier. So we would you'd hope that somehow we are highlighting it amongst industry partners. And of course, they're more than welcome to attend if they hear from it, but we were not particularly, I wouldn't say we're particularly targeting industry. That answers that question.
Yeah, no, I agree, but I'm sure industry will be very interested in it as well if they truly want the research that they fund to be meaningful.
I think as well, I agree with everything Donna said, that, as I said, quality impact assessments have been around a long time within the public sector. And they've been around for a whole range of different things, whether that's strategic work, development of a building, premises, all this sort of stuff has happened. And those that are successful businesses and successful industry, you'd like to think would have a better, would gain the insight of who is our target audience for whatever it is. They would gain a better lens if they utilised an EqIA type approach. So I know of various organisations when I worked in local government, for example, from industry that were adopting this approach. They weren't required to do so because of the specific details of the public sector equality duty and so on and so forth. But actually, it does do a good job, and it meets particular needs in terms of targeting your audience to work if you're going to sell a product or whatever you. So I would like to hope that I'd like to think that the quite successful industries do operate these types of systems. They might call it something different than an equality impact assessment, but essentially that's what it is. It's about knowing your consumers, knowing your target, and acting accordingly.
Thanks, Jules. Now we've got a question here, and the person says, sorry if this is a silly question, and I just want to highlight no question in this is silly, because if you're thinking it, I'm sure a lot of other people are thinking it too. So please don't feel that any question is silly. But what this person has said, I don't quite understand how independently the quality impact assessment is meant to be conducted. The flow chart showed that we would complete the form and receive feedback from the panel. Is this a free service or something we need to cost for? And I think this is a very important question that we need to clarify today for everyone. So thank you for asking that question. Donna, do you want to pick that up?
Yeah, so this is one of the main things we wanted to, we as a team wanted to get from this seminar today. So we wanted to kind of gauge what the demand would be for help from ourselves. I mean, ultimately, the hope is that organisations are encouraged to have their own panel, if you like, and Jules set out what our team is. So ultimately, it would be ideal if each organisation, so each university, had their own internal panel, because we can't do it for everybody. But at the moment, we do offer drop-in sessions, as has been mentioned, and they are free. And I think I saw another question in the chat. Are these free sessions available just for the ARCs or the NIHR infrastructure? So at the minute, they are available free. And our team that you've met today are available to help with any help that you need. So I think this specific question was, once they've done the quality impact assessment, would our panel give feedback? So at the minute, with our limited resource, that is possible. But what we would do going forward is we're going to gauge demand for that. And if there is enough demand, then there is the possibility that we could put on, as well as the training that we put on, a programme of events throughout the year, specifically on training other people in other organisations to be the panel, if you like, or to be the panel for people in other organisations. So that's what we're trying to gauge today. So it absolutely wasn't a silly question at all. It was a really good question. So at the minute they're free, but we're going to gauge it and then see what is needed in future. And then it possibly will be that we can put other events on, other seminars, which we will charge for as we charge for our training.
Great, Donna, thank you. Please keep posting your questions. This is your opportunity to ask our expert team anything that you want. And again, no question is silly. I guess I just want to pick up with the panel. You know, what are the common problems that you're picking up in research studies? What are the types of things that you are highlighting to the academics doing the research that they perhaps weren't aware of before? What sort of common themes are you picking up? Anybody for that question?
I think one of the common themes is when people automatically think there is no equality impact for particular communities if their particular research study is very, very confined. So, for example, there might be some research study that's about implementing a particular thing for certain disabled people. For example, it might be a visual component. It could be something else. And what we sometimes see from people is not actually thinking about the fact that, for example, if someone has one disability, they might actually have more than one disability. So an equality impact assessment would then go further and say, look, just because this person can't do something in this way, actually there may be other obstacles, barriers and so forth that prevent someone from coming on board. So one of the things that we ask in our form is for everyone to consider every one of those protected characteristics and to think about it. Do you really, really believe that there is no equality impact on young people, on people of non-binary gender, on whoever it may be from your research? And if you do, how do you know that? Have you asked people? Have you involved people? Surely you need to find out if there is an equality impact perspective on those people that might not immediately be targeted and be specifically contained within a research project. So, and I guess the key question that Barbara, Sandra, and myself always ask is this: you know, if you're doing something in a particular way, who might you exclude? Even if it might be unintentional exclusion, surreptitious exclusion, you can exclude people completely accidentally. If you think about it, indirect discrimination is probably one of the most penetrating forms of discrimination that we see in this country. And that's all part of that process as well. So it's getting people to think more broadly than would immediately be apparent, if that makes some sense. I see Sandra's got a hand. I'm sure she's got something to say on this.
I need to, when you ask that question, if we do it this way, who might we leave out or who would we exclude? I think part of your answer has got to look at how you mitigate that circumstance of exclusion, because they are there. They're not intentional, quite often completely accidental, but it does require, how do you mitigate it? You know, does it mean you've got to do a slightly smaller study on particular people or something like that? That isn't the only answer. But I think that's the mitigation of, it's okay to identify who you might exclude, but how do you mitigate to bring in their exclusion? I think it's one thing I've thought of. Thanks, Sandra. Barbara, you want to come in?
Just follow from the conversation. I think one of the common thread is also around the limitation to the recruitment strategies within the studies, and sometimes how do they sort of follow very narrow path and assessment of this protected characteristic and the impact. within such one lens. So as we mentioned in presentation, and the reason why we're doing is also linking with another element of people's identity, ethnicity, culture, and so on. So I think, and the dropping session are a really good example where we flesh out this conversation and create a linkage between, you know, what about different dimension. It's not just about age, it's not just about a religion, you know, you have to take a broader account. So I think that event is quite common in terms of, you know, how the equality impact assessment provides a very enhancement tool to, you know, to sharpen your recruitment strategy and your thinking within that practice.
And this is where intersectionality is so important as well. You know, that we're not so good in this country at sort of being intersectional yet. I think it's still, we recognise it's an issue that people have different identities, different identity components, but we don't always analyse these things with an intersectional approach in mind. We tend to silo various things. So someone has a disability, someone has an age, someone has this. The fact is, we all have all of it. Some of us have all those sorts of things, and so I think that's a key factor in terms of how you understand people, and that understanding people is an essential element of equality impact assessment.
Excellent, thank you. We've got a question here from Abin Thomas. Is there an example of an ethics committee supporting innovative recruitment documents, for example, consent forms, to be inclusive? Such as infographic as information sheet. Usually clinical trial recruitment forms cannot be changed for bureaucratic reasons. A very good question around ethics committees. Anybody want to field that question?
I can just make a comment on that, Marion.
Please do.
I think this is what, it's all down to the PI, I would think. If the PI conducted an equality impact assessment, let's just say for a stroke study, at the beginning, and came up with a consent form that was wasn't going to exclude certain people that had just had a stroke, you know, it could be infographics or whatever, why would an ethics committee not support it? I think it's about not the ethics committee being supporting it, it's about encouraging the PIs to do the equality impact assessment to make the consent forms more accessible, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. It is so important that they are supporting this sort of innovation and in being as inclusive as possible. So yeah, I agree, Donna. Got a good question here from Abby Miller. Hi, Marion. I'm an early career researcher and would like to ensure people of lower socioeconomic status are included in study design and recruitment. Do we have any tips? And Christine, do you want to pick up on this one?
Yeah, I was thinking that this kind of applies to any underserved group, but the way that you would address that issue, this is where your PPI comes in. This is where public involvement comes in, because in order to have a participant sample that's reflective of your population of interest, you need to bring that community in to help you make decisions. And one of the decisions that you're going to be thinking about is, how do I recruit this population? So if you can have a panel, or you work with a community members who can help you think through these issues, that's how you do it. So your PPI, your public involvement, acts as a mechanism to increase your inclusion. And Jules is going to add to that.
Yeah, that's just something very practical in the sense that if you look at our health inequalities data sample, which is part of the EqIA toolkit, you'll see that we, in addition to the protected characteristics, there are sections on deprivation. sections on education, sections on employment, I think is another factor. So because of course these are all elements of disadvantage, of marginalisation, of social exclusion, and so on and so forth. Sometimes they double up. You know, you'll often see that some of the most deprived communities are also some of the most diverse in terms of ethnicity, maybe in terms of religion, certainly in terms of disability. So that's the intersectional approach again. But yeah, just because the Equality Act does not stipulate that socioeconomic status or social class or education or geography is not a protected characteristic, doesn't mean that there is not an equality impact for those particular people from those communities. And trying to find that, and there are lots and lots of good research studies that's looked at the socioeconomic disadvantage and so on, and these sorts of things. So it's getting you to think of those areas on top of the legal requirements of the protected characteristics, in addition to, is a key factor. But have a look at that data sample document, and you'll see the sorts of data that are really useful in looking at things like employment deprivation and education.
Lovely, thanks, Jules. Another question here from Rebecca Barnes, which really interesting one on resources. One of the issues that I find both interesting and challenging is when groups with different protected characteristics and needs require different and sometimes incompatible approaches. For example, some groups need online approaches, others being excluded by this, or inclusive language for one group being problematic for another. How would you advise researchers to handle this when the resources are limited and when scientifically and pragmatically there might be challenges to having separate face-to-face and online activities for PPI or data collection? What an excellent question. Anyone want to field this or start to field that question? It's quite a full one, but quite a real one, I think.
I may start and people can join in. And that's really a question we're getting quite a lot during our interactive session. You know, people come with real challenges. So how do you satisfy both ends? How do you meet the needs of everyone? And I think we didn't really focus today on the action plan within your equality impact assessment, but I think a part of the process, you setting some action you should be taking as part of the equality impact assessment. And some of the action might be applicable to you to implement, but some of them might be wider, might be beyond the scope of the study. So some of the challenges highlighted by Rebecca might be part of your action plan and actually saying, you know, this is the limitation we are having for this particular project. And, you know, the action is to look at this outside of this research cycle, or maybe the responsibility lies within someone else's portfolio. But I suppose it links to the question we had before about having your PPI and setting the expectation and limitation. And, you know, a PPI session are there to test your idea, test your approaches, test your methodology, but also highlighting the limitation. So we always said, you know, within a quality impact assessment, you could have a big wish of thing you would like to achieve, but at the same time, there will be limitation where you can achieve. And as long as you take the reasonable actions and reasonable steps to achieve this, I think that sort of covers your equality lens, and actually you thought about it and you make consideration.
Jules, did you want to comment on something there, and Christine?
Yeah, I think Christine was first. Do you want to comment? Do you want to go first, Christine?
Yeah, it was just a quick one, really. For me, this really highlighted, that question really highlighted the importance of doing the equality impact assessment really early on, so that you can anticipate these issues, and then you can say how you are going to tackle those challenges as part of your funding bid. If you leave it until you've already got those limitations before you start thinking about it, then that might be that might be too late. It's not too late to think about it, but it might be too late to do something about it. However, even if you are in that situation, what you can do is think, well, okay, so I couldn't do that this time. I couldn't build in that flexibility this time. But hey presto, that's your recommendations for future research section written. That's it. It's done. You think, okay, I couldn't do it this time, but really strongly recommend that there's some flexibility built into recruitment strategies so that you can do things differently and you can adapt and iterate if your funder allows you to do that, which might be a challenge.
Jules, thanks, Christine.
Yeah, great advice from Christine and Barbara, and I think it's about recognizing limitations. If you think about it, if your research study the only way you're going to be truly representative of a research study over a particular geographical area is if you involve every single person within that geographical area. So if you were doing some research in the East Midlands, that would be right. My focus groups have to be absolutely everyone to be truly representative. So, and that isn't going to happen. Obviously, it's the world doesn't work like that. So, what the EqIA approach teaches you to do is to focus a little bit on where key issues might be, and sometimes within those key issues there are going to be clashes. You know, sometimes, for example, if you're engaging with people from some religious communities, there may well be clashes over things like mental health and people being able to be open within that sort of type of community about their mental health status, or sexual orientation would be another one. Sometimes we know from some communities certain voices dominate over others, historically, traditionally, and so on. So sometimes that might be a male voice, and sometimes that might be an elderly person's voice as opposed to a young person's voice. So you might need to think actually a key factor here is to get the voice of women. It might also be to get the voice of young women. It might be go further from an intersectional approach. I need to get the voice of young women from Muslim communities or from Hindu communities and so on and so forth. So your focus, your equality lens will start to pick out key factors. You will never be able to accommodate everybody. But certainly one thing an equality approach certainly teaches you to do is to recognize that one size does not fit all. You need to be flexible, and that's a key factor.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jules. That's well said. Another couple of questions before we close today. And I like this question. Is it recommended to say in funding or fellowship application forms that I have completed an equality impact assessment process? And this process can also be used whilst the research is already in progress. Anybody want to pick that one up?
Well, absolutely. I think during our drop-in session, we get quite a lot of participants who are in the process of putting the fellowship application or funding application. And I think if any, that just shows you thinking about equality lenses at the beginning and actually you implementing that in your practice. And if any, the equality impact assessment is an enhancement tool for your application, for your fellowship. So absolutely, I would strongly recommend it to utilize this.
And I would also say my experience of sitting on panels, if I was to read that in an application for a fellowship and I'm reviewing that application, I would think this was a really excellent practice. So I would look very favourably on that. So please do comment on your applications when you're going to be completing that. I think it will be well received, but do it well. Pick up another couple of questions. As a PhD student, if supervisors are not aware of the equality impact assessment, how feasible are they to implement? And can they be incorporated within a study with support from NIHR or ARC East Midlands, or do supervisors need to be taking the leadership role?
Can I take that one, Marianne?
You can indeed.
So, I would encourage any PhD student to highlight this equality impact assessment process to their supervisors. We obviously have, I think Emma told us yesterday, 42 PhD students within EqIA, all of whom we encourage to do the training and carry out this process. But this brings us back to the purpose of today's meeting, is that obviously the feedback from the last one was that people want to do an equality impact assessment but haven't got the support. So I'll just reiterate our last question, my answer to a previous question, where at the moment I would say highlight this to your PhD supervisor, because ultimately what we would like to see further down the line is that all PhD supervisors are aware of these and encourage their PhD students to conduct an equality impact assessment with the support of a team within their university that can help them. But until we get there, obviously take advantage of our free drop-in sessions. And again, it comes back to, once we start to see what the demand is, we can think about what we can put on to assist in ultimately getting where we want everybody to get, which is that universities have got their own teams to help their own researchers, including PhD students, to conduct an equality impact assessment, so that ultimately all research has been conducted following an equality impact assessment.
And that's the holy grail that we want to get to. I think we will start to see this shift, but it's just great that the people on this seminar today are early adopters and interested in.
Sorry, Marion,
so keen to make it happen. On you go, Donna.
And I was just going to say, looking in the chat, we've had quite a few people book onto the drop-in sessions while we've been speaking as well, so that's great.
Fantastic. That's great. No, I think it's a really, really key topic and one that everybody's interested in at the minute. I'm going to take this last question before we close today. We wanted to know the characteristics of patients who were eligible to take part in our trial but declined to participate. However, people who do not take part do not consent to share data, and therefore we haven't been able to capture this data. Is there any way around this?
Some of the other panel members might have something to say, but I would think wouldn't it be about collecting the protected characteristics of the people that do consent, which is what we do in all of our RKM studies as well, because then obviously it doesn't quite answer the question, but it does let you know what who isn't being represented in your study. So you're not collecting the data. It doesn't quite answer the question, I don't think, but I'm thinking that might be the best way around it. But other panel members might have other thoughts on that.
I think you're right, Donna. The people, it will then allow you to see who doesn't, and your equality impact assessment will highlight those questions.
I think as well, that's good, Donna and Maddie. I think sometimes when it comes to sort of data collection, particularly quality monitoring and so forth, people need to understand the reasons why we ask those questions and get a better appreciation. And one of the key factors is so that we can identify gaps. If people don't take part in these things, how are we going to know properly, more thoroughly, where those gaps are? And sometimes we get a bit lackadaisical when it comes to quality monitoring. We just give people a form and say, please fill it in. And some people do, some people don't. But lots of people think, well, why do I need to fill it? Why do you need to know this? And some people say, well, I'm not going to answer this question. Obviously, most good equality monitoring forms will have prefer not to say as an option. But unless people are encouraged to do that, we are not going to necessarily know as well where our gaps are, where gaps in provision, gaps in service, gaps in how things are reached by certain people. So it's not just a question of producing a form and asking people to do it. It's actually thinking about why you need that particular information and then communicating that to people as well.
Absolutely. And I think, given the time, Christine, I think we're going to have to close down here because we're slightly over time. My timekeeping is not fantastic. So I'm just going to thank everybody today, the panel specifically, for taking part in this seminar. I think the response that we've had is really indicative of how important the area is. ARC East Midlands is doing some fantastic work in this area. Please engage with us. Please let us know how you're getting on. Please download the toolbox. Things are in the chat. We've recorded the session today and we're going to be showing it on our YouTube channel. We will also be sending out forms asking you for some feedback, and we'll also be circulating some surveys because we do want to know from you what topics you want us to cover in the future. We are listening, so please do respond to those. And a final thank you to Michelle and to Kieran, our comms team behind the scenes, who have put on this seminar for us today and provide fantastic support for all of us. So I just want to wish you all a Merry Christmas and look forward to hearing from you and for you all attending future seminars. So from all of us at East Midlands, thank you for attending, and we hope you get something beneficial from it.